Hi folks, Kieran here again. Hope you're all good. This is a video response to Nicolaus de Silentio and his video, which was I believe called an argument. Hang on, let me have a look. Argument against socialism. Capitalism wins. Hi Nick, or Nicolaus, or Nicholas. I'm not sure how you pronounce your name. Sorry. Hope you're good. I really liked your video. Okay, so I've kind of summarized in my mind your arguments in your video to sort of three sort of essential points. Forgive me if I'm kind of getting the wrong end of the stick on any of this. Please feel free to put me right. The first point you seem to make fairly early on in your video is something, I think it goes by the name of self-ownership principle, or maybe is it the non-aggression principle? I think they're two sort of similar things. You hear this, I've heard this argument a fair bit coming from kind of market anarchist kind of people on the internet, and the idea is that you kind of own yourself, but you also own the fruits of your labours, and therefore it's kind of wrong to take something off someone who takes something that you own off you, because that's theft. I did have a debate with another YouTube user called the Radical Individual, who's a market anarchist, on this point, and the point I was making is, would you steal from a billionaire to feed a starving child? Was the hypothetical I put to him, and I think he wasn't really willing to say that he would steal from a billionaire to feed a starving child when it came down to it. I think if you would steal from a billionaire to feed a starving child, that means that this non-aggression principle, or self-ownership, or ownership principle, or whatever, isn't kind of the bedrock of your whole morality. I suppose you might hold the position that it's wrong to steal and so on, but in extreme cases like this, to feed a starving child, you should steal. Anyway, I don't really see this ownership thing as this fundamental moral thing. Really, it's kind of it strikes me as a kind of subordinate to the kind of promoting the well-being of people in general. Okay, then another point, second argument you made, which actually I'm taking them in kind of a random order here, but near the end of your video you were making another point, which was what did I write down here? Okay, equality. Oh yeah, like this equality, this kind of trade-off between equality and freedom. The example you gave is if you want to have equality of everyone to be equally fashionable in their clothes, you'd have to force everybody to wear the same clothes or wear something equally fashionable. Therefore, you take away their freedom to wear whatever clothes they like. And therefore, yeah, you're diminishing freedom at the expense because for the sake of creating equality. You actually did make this phrase. You did at some point in this argument say that equality is not a natural thing. I do kind of agree with that. I'm a socialist, and I'm a massive radical egalitarian. So, but I would concede that it isn't really a natural. Equality isn't necessarily a natural thing. I think there is a large part of us which is kind of egalitarian. Part of our nature, kind of our sense of fairness, is often boils down to basically people being treated equally, or people getting the same sort of share. That's our idea of fairness is often tied up with that, and people often get very pissed off when they're treated unequally, and like a lot of conflict seems to come from inequality. Therefore, equality is quite a natural way for us to behave. But I think, yeah, you're right. There's also natural urges towards other things, towards letting the better person gain more or whatever. But in terms of this trade-off, I don't really know. I think that often it works the other way. Like if you have more equality, then that can create more freedom. Particularly if you got like a really sort of badly off people, and you transfer some wealth to them, that gives them, greater freedom to do things, and the actual people you took the money off, they didn't lose so much. So, to give an example, if there are two people who live on an island, and one of them owns 99% of the land, and the other one owns 1%. If you do some kind of land reform to give the 1% person more of the land off the other person, then that will result in a greater amount of freedom, because the other person wouldn't be able to really make so much use of the of all of his or her land. So I see where I'm coming from here. So it isn't. I don't think it's always like a trade-off between equality and freedom. Equality and freedom can go hand in hand, I think. Okay, last point I want to address was some sort of argument to do with this scale-free networks, and this was more, I think, more of a practical argument on your part. You were kind of saying that basically capitalism is a bit like a scale-free network, and people won't all know what that is. And I don't have that good a handle on it, to be honest. I read this popular science book a few years ago, which had some stuff about that. But roughly speaking, my understanding, I'll try and express my understanding of what a scale-free network is by giving an example. If you imagine on Facebook, if say 90% of the people on Facebook had 100 friends or less, and a further 9% of people had between 100 and 1,000 friends, and then imagine that 0.9 of the people on Facebook had between 1,000 and 10,000 friends, and then 0.09 or something people had between 10,000 and 100,000 friends. That's sort of what a scale-free network is like. Basically, you've got a smaller and smaller number of people having more and more, having more and more connections, and in the kind of terminology we use for this, the people in Facebook would be called nodes, and the friendships would be called connections. So you're saying that capitalism is a bit like a scale-free network, and you're saying the socialism would either be one, a bit like on Facebook, if everybody's forced to have, say, 50 friends or something, or 200 friends. You have this network where everyone's just kind of evenly connected to everyone else. You don't have these super popular kind of nodes, which you call hubs, I believe. The other option is a centralized one, where you have one really, really popular person in the middle, sort of thing, and everyone else is kind of connected to that person, or connected to each other via that person or something. It's like a central sort of station or something. And you suggest that the most efficient or the most successful or something way of doing it is this scale-free thing. Oh, by the way, I don't. Okay, I don't really understand why it's called scale free. I guess it's a bit like this kind of fractal thing where you look closer and closer, and there's the same amount of detail or something. I don't quite understand the maths or the exactly how it all works. I also don't really know why that is the most efficient way, or if it has been sort of proven in theory that that is the most efficient way to run a network. You seem to be arguing a fair bit from a kind of analogy by saying this sort of situation in the early internet where it was a thing for the army to use, where if one place got bombed, we wouldn't want the central sort of hub to be bombed. And also, you also suggest that this more evenly distributed network would also be susceptible to some sort of or it's something fragile in some way. I don't really know. Yeah, I mean, the economy isn't this army situation where you're going to get bombed. So I don't know quite what the peacetime analogy of those problems are really. And also, you're saying like nature has produced sort of scale-free networks quite a lot. But I think as Perrow might have pointed out, there are lots of things in nature which are not scale-free networks. If you take like if you take the brain, maybe it's a scale-free network. But if you take like the whole entire human body, then there is the central bit, which is the brain. That seems to work quite well. So I hear. Anyway, I think, well, also the main point, which also Perrow, I think, made in his response, was that, okay, under socialism, you could still have a scale-free network. I think you quote, you suggest things like Facebook and YouTube and some big websites are a bit like these big hubs. But that doesn't mean that they have to be privately owned or run by sort of one rich person. If you take like the BBC website, for example, is quite a popular hub. That's a kind of nationally sort of owned thing, which doesn't have very few owners. It has the whole country owns it. So. And we could have much more democratic control where large numbers of people are sort of controlling these hubs. So yeah, maybe even if I grant that it is the most efficient thing to have these scale-free sort of things with these hubs, that doesn't mean that these hubs have to be one person, or there's no particular reason why it would have to be a rich person. I mean, Wikipedia is this pretty important hub on the internet of information, but it's not, I believe it's not a profit-making thing. So I suppose I know that people who run it, they're not necessarily rich. I mean, they could be, but it's not necessarily the case that as far as I know, they don't make huge amounts of money from Facebook, from Wikipedia, like the Facebook guy does. So there's that point. Trying to think of any other points I can make. That's all that springs to mind at the moment. So anyway, I really enjoyed watching your video, and I hope you found my response interesting. All the best, Nick.